Our scripture reading is taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 11 to 13, and I'm going to invite John to come up and share it with us. Thank you, John. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 11 through to 13. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. But now we see in a mirror, dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. And now abide faith, hope, love. These three, but the greatest of these is love. Amen. Thank you. Thank you, John. I'm now going to invite Ros, Ray's daughter, to come forward, and she's going to share the eulogy with us. Is that all right?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. This is going to be a long witness so far. Okay. But you still need it closer? Here, John? No? No good? Not really? Okay. All right, how does that seem? Any better up here? About there? All right. Apologies for the spit. All right. Okay. I've had the job of trying to pull together a bit of a summary of Dad's life. So, Dad was born at Harrisville, Queensland, to Sheila Kathleen and Eric William John Blackwood, and they were also Australian by birth. His middle name was in memory of his mother's brother. In fact, I think he's Sheila's twin brother. Fine. And so that brother's pet name stuck, Ray. So that was Dad's name all his life. Dad was one of a fortunate few children back in those years, having been born in the second part of the 20s. But his father, as the country bank manager, was consistently employed through the Depression years, and so he was little personally moved by that era. His needs being met and his mind being engaged by those who were part of the household and in the community. Though a quite serious historian in many respects in far later life, Ray did not recall or elaborate for us as children much on the years of his childhood. He knew very little of his family's earlier generational history. I've asked myself, was there an undefined skeleton in the family cupboard? But it was not for airing, and so it was left to drift into the dusts of time. A pity for us, we didn't get much of the background family story. We have snippets that hint at the kind of years which recall his childhood. His first memories, conveyed to us, show he revelled in the natural environment of Tully, Queensland, in the early Depression years, when his father Eric was stationed there. He was schooled locally at that time for some early years. The recollections of that time were not of the children or the teachers in his formal setting or of a favourite toy, but of the memorable adventure of scaling a large tree and the reward of selecting one of the countless myriad leaves on a swaying bough to rub close to his delicate nose and experience its earthy but delicate fragrance. The large, hairy, stinging caterpillar hidden under beneath that one leaf that he chose is the sharp memory at that tender age told to us and possibly taught to us by Dad as an important lesson in the surprise chances of life despite scaling to heights. Leaving Tully behind, his parents were transferred to other rural locations as head bank manager in Queensland, and the family became five with the birth of two younger brothers, Lynn, 6 years his junior, and John, 12 years his junior. At age 12 years, he was then duly enrolled in a respectable boarding school at Warwick, Queensland, Slade Anglican School. There was a fine tradition within this outpost of empire culture, and indeed all the boys took their turn at being given a strong start in the matters of manhood, civic responsibility and contribution to society. Apparently though, not really elaborated upon, Ray could do A-levels for all his subjects and mathematics to a fine degree in these school years. But education beyond the basic certificate was not considered needed, and so transfer to a bank position with the Bank of New South Wales at age 16 years was seen as a fitting application of the theory into a work role. By this time, Dad's brothers Glenn and John were also Slade bound, each with their talents and all reflecting the loving home influence of Sheila and Eric. The boys appeared to have been a strong team of achievers, needing dispersion into each of their chosen careers. But then the business and purposes of Australian lives in all its forms in city or regional town was seriously dragged by our entry into the second 20th century World War. And as always, those of youth and a sense of duty and adventure went to serve their country and the British Empire. This meant Dad left his position as bank teller and commenced training at Winnipeg, Canada, as Air Force crew, specifically as navigator to contribute to the aerial war effort we needed. Clearly, his mother, as has been the story of ages, was heartbroken, and his father, whilst grieved, was still comforted that their oldest boy would so steer his life. So from the very predictable gentle hum of Australia's peace-governed rural Queensland, he made his way to the barracks and bombers of one of two navigational pilot training projects under the Empire Air Force Training Scheme. And I did a little bit of Googling, and there were thousands of Australian men who went to that program to be trained by the pilots, navigators, gunners, etc. This episode of Dad's life, again, not greatly elaborated upon by him in the years of knowing him as his daughter, still draws a parallel with the adventure of the trip home in Tully. Canada must have been a huge adventure and a dizzying height to reach in gaining his qualification as an Australian Air Force navigator. In 1945, he returned to our shores to then set off from Brisbane at the tender age of 19 years in the MS Clipfontaine, the troop transport ship on which he sailed to war. As he reached for one of the myriad roles of strategic service on the swaying bow of the Pacific warfront in the hope to breathe in the fragrance of adventure, as an Air Force officer, the news of the Imperial Japanese Army's surrender delivered an unexpected stinging but anticlimax. An important lesson in the surprise chances of life despite scaling the heights. The story of Dad's life post the war adventure includes return to civilian life as a bank teller, with a real talent for mathematics, ledger figures and foreign exchange rates. At outposts of the Bank of New South Wales in rural Queensland, then Port Moresby, when he first found the thrill of swaying breeze behind the sail, and then in Suva, Fiji. It was there he then determined to pursue peacetime romance, marrying Mavis Murray in 1953, and beginning a pathway to a very well thought through career and family life. The sailing strand through his life was a passion and that it needed to be subsumed under the responsibility of work and commitments to those he loved for the important early years of establishing security for us. He did this with the unelaborated upon determination of a dedicated breadwinner husband and father. Yet again, the bank transfer mode ruled the career climb of energetic and clearly talented Eric Ralph, who began the greater part of his career through transfer as a banker to the head office of the Bank of New South Wales in Sydney in the 1960s. And we were, my brother and I, then around to sort of, start being part of observing that path that went forward. And that was a role that had more swaying boughs of achievement, but not always the outcomes to match the ambitions close with his heart. What surprises and frustrations happened in the grind of duty, including as Treasurer of the Bank of New South Wales for a significant period through the 1970s, he never elaborated upon to us, his young family. But the weekends became the outlet of his sailing thing. Initially by building a small sailing skiff called Tink, which his children were to delight in manning each weekend at the Avalon Sailing Club races in Pittwater, Sydney. Bigger sailing machines followed, including too much time spent fitting out and customising a 24-foot sailing sloop, turned by Dad and his brothers were all breasting the breeze on the waterway called Pittwater in the Hawkesbury River mouth. He also rose to the great heights of crewing on the sloop Storm Bay in the auspicious Sydney to Hobart yacht race in 1976. Again, having got to this dynamic betterment from which to choose a myriad of tactical strategies for speed on his turn at the helm as they went down to Bass Strait, though the smell of success was there, so was a wind gust that snatched the mast, the surprise chances of life despite scaling the heights. They limped back to Eden, New South Wales, never to touch the hallowed ground of Constitution Dock. Where now? Within 5 years, he had finished his long years in Sydney in foreign exchange matters. At the very birth date of his 55th birthday, he had achieved eligibility for retirement, and he and Mum reached the heights of an early retirement in North Queensland, deserting us, his now well-established children in Sydney, to take his prized, now bigger sloop sequel to live in the Whitsundays. Here, again, at the happy height of non-regimentation, he threw away ties, he threw away coordinated outfits, grew a beard, and had a myriad choice of ease. But the surprise chances of life delivered its irritating lack of purpose. His need for a new height scale, when settled into retirement, raised all our eyebrows in the very seriously tackled challenge of methodically researching and then cataloguing the detailed history of the place name and the events of the Whitsundays. This labour of great love, and it took more than a couple of decades, finally launched in 1997 at the age of 71 years as the work called An Historical Dictionary of the Whitsundays. The continued fine-tuning of this now, for him, totally memorised tome occupies some time through the latter part of his retirement and opened again a fascination for detective work and a new height to reach, that of the mystery of a famous Portuguese map from the 16th century that showed the discovery and mapping of the Great Southland. Again, our eyebrows raised. So hard did he research this intriguing mystery by the hidden codes of place names noted by Portuguese explorers on the map, that he determined to challenge conventional wisdom in some corners of cartography, rejecting the idea that this, the famous Dauphin map, the object of his intense scrutiny, was the eastern coast of Australia in crude form, an attempt, if you like, by Portuguese sailors to trek well down this Southland mass. So what then did this researcher propose? Dad knew deep within that there on the mapping canvas was Australian coastline, but simply a very small corner of the same, the Coburg Peninsula of just the Northern Territory, just revealing coastline potentially productive for expanding Portuguese trade in spices in this unknown continent, not the ambition of Portuguese empire to begin circumnavigation of the whole. Following determining that, he had some stinging rejection by those of conventional wisdom and cartography circles that related to this map, following his publishing his theory in the Australian and New Zealand Map Society Journal just 18 months ago. Then deteriorating health from that point, Dad now living in Blackwood with Mum, determined less and less attention to these kind of details. But Ray made a last scale up to the heights, this time of the contemporary 21st century form of expression of knowledge, by engaging the services of a web designer to create his place of comment upon this map, the Dauphin map, on the World Wide Web. Now he had come to a chosen advantage point to satisfy his rigorous intellect, and now the chances of life having left him well regarded for the high standards of productivity that we realise have been the hallmark of his life, he'd reached a place we can look back at. He's greatly missed, and the greater family grieved a strong figure of quiet application and generous attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross, for sharing the eulogy with us. Now I'm going to invite Ray's granddaughter, Taylor, to come and share with us her reflections.
I have the honour of speaking on behalf of the 3 Blackwood grandchildren and words from my sister Buzz, who I'll read out first, and then my brother James, and then finally some of my own thoughts. So Buzz's thoughts on Grandad. When I think of Grandad, I think of warmth and kindness. I think of the sparkle in his eye when he saw me being cheeky as a kid. I think of his stories and smile. I think of the way he loved and saw the beauty in nature and encouraged me to see it too. When I think of Grandad, I think of adventure, a huge capacity for discovery and exploration. There is a quote by John Eldridge which captures the desire in all of us to adventure. It says, "Adventure, with all its requisite danger and wilderness, is a deeply spiritual longing written into the soul of man. Whilst many of us are afraid to pursue adventure, Grandad is a man that followed this deep longing, who went on real adventures and always has stories to share. I am grateful for the man he was, for the way he instilled this sense of adventure in all of us, the way his life spurs on us to be courageous, and for his love and kindness towards us, his grandkids. We love you, Grandad, and we'll miss you." Thanks, Buzz. Next, from James. The Blackwood Men. I'm the son of born Blackwood and the grandson of Ray Blackwood. I am a proud Blackwood man. Blackwood men are cheeky. Grandad has that cheeky smirk when he has a bowl of ice cream or sits facing the pool of Boathouse to see the pretty girls. It's a boyish half smile that enjoys the sweetness life has to offer. We're creative. Grandad's contraptions are world famous. His Trans-Pacific flying machine is legendary. Stories of his clock radios and Manly Juniors that he built from scratch. The Blackwood men are curious, know-it-alls. I once witnessed an argument between Grandad and Dad. Argument is a stretch, a disagreement. It was over a chapter in one of Grandad's books about where Captain Cook had entered the Whitsundays. Grandad had drawn a conclusion, and Dad had done copious, unsolicited research to prove him wrong. A classic moment, 2 titans of aquatic history battling it out for Cook's path of entry. A seismic academic moment. Blackwood men are joyful. Grandad's joy and happy spirit is something that carries through. He loved to see us and was kind, happy, cheeky whenever we were around. But my favourite Blackwood quality is the quest for adventure. Grandad's Compass 29 is always in mind as the picture of adventure. A man exploring his tiny yacht. I love that picture. Grandad's quest carries on through Dad and me and my boys. A quest for life and all its riches to be plundered. Love you, Grandad. Miss you. Love, James. And finally, from my own perspective, as we've heard from Roz, and I'm sure we'll hear from Dad, Grandad's life is one that shaped many of us here and the whole Blackwood clan. And I want to say thank you to him for how he lived his life and how he shaped who we are. Firstly, I'm thankful to Grandad for creating his family with Granny and for raising his 2 children, Roz and my dad. And I'm thankful for the things he taught them. In particular, my dad, in particular, sailing, as we heard from Roz. Sailing is something that our family has enjoyed over many, many years, and we have so many special memories from those times. And I'm so thankful for that. Whether it's sailing up the East Coast, Port Stephens, pottering around the Whitsundays, very, very many happy memories as a family on boats. I did an assignment in grade 4 on how to sail, and spent lots of time with Dad telling me how the sails work, what the telltales were, but mixed in with the technical lessons was him recounting how his own father, Grandad, had taught him to sail, and that is a real treasured memory for me. But Grandad didn't just teach them how to sail,
He also taught and had a love of adventure, as we heard from both Buzz and James as well. A love of life and exploring, from living in Port Moresby, finding his wife in Fiji, or exploring and documenting one of the most beautiful regions of the world in the Whitsundays. It was a pretty proud moment as a 10-year-old when Dad returned from one of his trips to see Granny and Granddad with this giant yellow book that my granddad had written. I got it, I can picture it in my mind, and as Rose said, that research and that knowledge that he pursued right through, and I enjoyed listening to him recount the letters he was writing to the cartography organisations, hearing about how he was continuing that work. And I think that love of learning and academic pursuit is something present in all of us as grandchildren. And the last thing I'm thankful for Granddad for is one very specific memory that I'm sure he didn't even notice at the time. But we had been out one day in the Shute Harbour exploring, and we're walking back up to Granny and Granddad's house. It was a very, very steep hill and a long hill. And for a little girl in the hot sun, I was really, we're not up to the challenge of keeping going. But Granddad kept helping me along, saying, just see that tree up there, we'll just go there, then you can have a break. So march on to the next tree and make it. And then he said, oh, I think there's a green ant's nest in that next tree up there. Why don't you go have a look at that? So I continued a bit. And sure enough, we eventually got to the top of the hill. That little story is something that I think about very, very often. I run a lot, and often when I'm ready to give up, I think Granddad would say, just get to the next tree. And so that's something I will hold with me forever. And it's not just walking up a hill or running, it's in all of life. When it's overwhelming or too big, I can break it down and keep going. So I'm very thankful for that. Granddad, thank you for the life that you lived and for enabling those who follow you to live lives full of adventure, sharing that love with our families. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, and thank you for teaching us to just keep plodding along one step at a time. We will always remember you, and for me particularly, it'll be in those moments when it seems tough and hard, but I'll know from you to keep on.
Thank you. I know there was one or two others who were thinking about whether they would share or not. John?
Hello everyone, my name is John, I'm the young one. The three of us, three boys in our family. I was probably a bit, me being the last, I was probably disappointed with my mother. She'd always wanted to go somewhere. You know, she got me instead, so there we are. You know, everything has been such beautiful work said by Ross and the family, and I don't want to repeat myself, but Ray, as Rosie says, went to school at Slade when I was 18 months old. After that, he went to Canada, and he went to New Guinea, and he went to Fiji, where he went to beautiful Davis. And there's one place you forgot to mention. It's a really exciting place. That's Aramak. Aramak is like the western Queensland town, right in the middle of nowhere. But strangely enough, and you can back me up here, Mavis, is that on a recent, but a trip up there during your lifetime to revisit Aramak, you found his name on the memorial statue. So there he is, the name on the statue. He should be remembered a lot more because he was a great guy. He was my older brother Glenn and I, to him, to us both, he was a hero. And we got all these exciting letters and postcards from, especially Canada, when we lived in Canada, which really, you know, I'm talking about the age when I was about 4 to 6 and Glenn was about 8 to 10 type of thing. You know, it's absolutely amazing letters and great adventures, and we loved every minute of it. But everything, I won't go on because I will say that my mother and father were very proud of me. Sheila and Eric really thought you know, I know they loved a lot of us. Gray's success in life was just so great that it was a big thing for them. Which reminds me another little saying. I'll try not to go on too long. But I think in my business life, at one stage I was very much involved in the mining business and finance, and had a lot of trips to Sydney and Melbourne on various trips. But quite often, people would say to me, "Are you Ray Blackwood's brother?" Yeah. And I'll do a bit of describing here too. Later years, 20 years later, they used to say, "Are you Angus Blackwood's father?" So that's what we're here about. But just to finish off, I'd like to say that since we've been talking, since we're all going to hear together, I've been watching Ray's over there, and I think his smile has brought me. I really do think that is very cool. So thank you very much for having me. After my reservation, especially for my wife, Ben. It would love to have been here today, but she just felt like it. Thank you.
John talking to me, he was just saying, commiserations there. John, I'm sorry I didn't hear it all, but Rosalind can translate soon. Thank you for looking up.
That's right.
Now, what's happening there? All right, here's Angus. Angus is going to take the stage.
Hello everyone, my name's Angus. I'm John's son and Ray's, I'm going to say, youngest nephew. I'll have to be nice, I'd say.
Yes.
It amazes me that I remember in around about 1980, I think it was, we visited Mavis and Ray just as they retired at Shoe Harbour at the age of 55. Well, I'm 55 and I've got a long way to go, so I'm very envious of Ray. I'd like to echo Dad's comments about the speeches. Roz, Michaela, just fantastic, and your siblings, of course, and I need to throw in the description of the Blackwood men. I think that was pretty good. If that's who I am, I'm happy with that description. So tell me well done. That was really good. I just wanted to say two things, really is, because of the age difference between Dad and Ray, which is 12 years, probably my connection with Ray and Mavis has come later in life. And particularly over the last 10 years, and there's two instances in particular that are good memories for me, strong memories. One was about 2016, one was 2021, involving two of my children, my oldest boy Edward and my daughter Luella. Both as they were approaching getting their driver's licences, I would take them on a drive around Queensland to get their hours up. And each time I dropped in to visit Ray and Mavis, once with Edward at Shoe Harbour, and once with Luella, my daughter, here in Megara last year with Roz and John, who kindly accommodated us. I think when I was listening to Dad used to talk about Ray, two words just always come to mind: intellect and wisdom. And I think that theme today, amongst many others. But for me, I was so grateful because both Mavis and Ray sat with our children, both firstly Edward and then with Luella, and passed on their own unique wisdom. And I was just to sit there and watch from their life experience. They had the time, they had the patience, and the will and the desire to share things carefully. And I know Edward, my boy, took a lot from Ray, and I know Luella, my daughter, had a great conversation with Mavis about her life, and really, as she was coming into adulthood, really felt positive about the opportunities in life. So I think that a great team, Ray and Mavis, and love visiting, always learning something. You're always prepared to debate and argue. So we certainly had a couple of those over the dinner table, but very, very fond memories of what you passed on to my children as well. So again, Mavis, Roz, Vaughan, commiserations, but amazing man, amazing life, and thank you for having us today. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Angus. Was there anyone else that was wanting to get up and just share a reflection? No?
regal, shall we be the shoes of trouble? Let me say it, let me wash upon your shoe. Let me regal, shall we be for me on the yellow silver.
Well, it's not far down to paradise, at least it's not for me. And if the wind is right, you can sail away, find tranquility. Oh, the canvas can do miracles, just you wait and see. Believe me, it's not far to never land. Reason to pretend. If the wind is right, you can find the joy of innocence again. Oh, the canvas can do miracles, just you wait and see. Believe me. Sailing takes me away to where I'm going. not far bad, Santa. At least it's not wrong. The wind is right, sail away, find serenity. Oh, the canvas can do miracles. Just you wait and see, and believe me. Sailing takes me away to wherever our place needed to be. Dream wind to carry me, soon I will be.
Right, and I invite Grace and Lon to come up and just share your reflection, please. Thanks. Well, I'm Vaughan, cousin of Angus, nephew of John, son of Ray and Mavis, brother of Rose. All wonderful relatives, and I just want to start today by thanking so many of you. Mark, we thank you so much and the Hinkle Fellowship for being so kind and gracious, and at relatively short notice opening your facility and serving us so kindly and generously. And thank you for that. I want to thank Roz and John. John's had to put up with another crazy Blackwood for a week or more, and they have been so gracious, and Roz, as usual, has just bent over backwards to accommodate everybody's needs, and her service of mum and dad and love of mum and dad has been just such a wonderful thing. And of course, Mum, looking so beautiful and so amazing at 99 to be here, and we grieve. But you know, people here when they live so long that most of their friends are not able to be here to be celebrating Dad. And so we thank you immensely for coming, for Mickey coming from Canberra, and for the Blackwood men coming down from Brisbane, and for others of you to support Ross and John from the fellowship. We thank you. It is, you know, a bittersweet moment where we celebrate a marvelous story, and we mourn the loss of a great friend. You know, Dad was never religious, and on one level, not very spiritual either. And he used to say he couldn't go to church because the walls would fall down. And it would be such a shock if he walked in. And he never thought, you know, religious life was for him. And he was always a humble man, and even at a time like this, he'd be very uncomfortable because of the attention and not really wanting ever to be in the limelight. But Mum and Roz and I, who have deep convictions of faith, just felt it so necessary to have a moment of celebration and of honouring a husband of only 70 years, and a father for so many years. So we're so thankful you can be with us. In recent years, I've been forced to study and think a great deal about family and parenting, and particularly fathers and fathering. And I've come away with some very deep convictions and the role that that plays in my life. One of the most profound convictions comes from the Ten Commandments, the great ancient book of Hebrews, that we are commanded to honour our fathers and mothers and our life to be prosperous. And in my journey and in my kind of later revelation, I think I've come to realise how important it is to honour our forebears and with all that they've sacrificed and given to us. So on behalf of them, we honour you. Everything. The second one is the privilege and gift of strong parents, and in this case, a strong father and a father figure in my life. And how, not really till these late years in life, I realised how significant that has been for me as a man, and how important it is for men. And the Blackwood men, and how wonderful to have 3 generations here of strong men. And my dad was a strong man, although a quiet one. And the qualities that have been passed on are significant for me, and I believe significant for our communities, and really the answer to the world's needs is strong father, care and love of sons and daughters. So today, we honour Dad and celebrate him, partly because he is worthy, and as we've seen so many lovely stories, and also a healing for our soul, to close this chapter and to give him the last word and the last meditation on who he is and what he's given to us. Thank you, Mickey, on behalf of us and James. Those words are so beautiful. And John and Angus, thank you. And Oz, your eulogy, you obviously got the writing flair in our family. As I grew up with Dad, reflecting really just recently, we spent a lot of time together in my formative years, about 15. And I hadn't really thought about this much, but we actually spent a lot of time in each other's company. Usually it was around boats, and you kind of get that message that boats were his delight and joy and his heaven. And but I would spend a lot of time with either asking a hammer or picking up a piece of wood, because he actually built, I think, about 4 boats in and around our house, and would sail a couple of others. So we spent a lot of time together, but the interesting thought that has emerged is a lot of that for me was actually in silence. And Dad was not a talkative guy. And so beyond pass me the hammer or pull on the sheet, we actually spoke very little. And we would, each Sunday we would go down to the house of worship, which was Pittwater, and spend hours in the car together. We'd sail and race and have incredible times together, but there was virtually no conversation. And so I've been reflecting on this over these last few days, and have come to kind of recognise that in the Blackwood families, and I don't know what it's like in your family, John and Angus, but I came up with my norm that men do things together and don't talk. And that fathers and sons do things together, and silence is a big part of that. And I think as we were together in these last days with Dad, in this last month, as I kept coming up from Sydney to be with him in the last days, I felt this deep desire to be with him. And although he deteriorated, he couldn't speak, he couldn't hear, but deep within me was a desire to be with him. And that's what we do. And when he actually drew his last breath, I just, lost it really. Deep emotion erupted within me. great loss of my silent advocate and silent friend, who had imparted so much to me, son, without words. And it's kind of the mystery, I think, of the father-son connection. A bit hard to explain, but Dad imparted to me so much by his life without words. It's a deep legacy he's left, and he stirred and imparted many things deep in my spirit. He's helped me be a father. He's helped me be a husband. He's helped me be true to myself. And I think he would be shocked in many ways as to what he's left behind, because it was him being consistent and faithful in being true to himself that was the message, and not words. I'm so thankful for, as we've already heard, his love of the sea. And by definition, that is a love of adventure and a spirit of danger and challenge. He gave permission for us to be dangerous and adventurous because he had gone before us. And I don't know if you remember the quote that Buzz read from Eldridge's book, that deep within each man and woman there is a love for adventure and a fear of it. And Dad gave me permission to step into it, into dangerous places, and to risk, and to try things that were outside our comfort zone. Combined with that was a love of the wilderness, a love of nature, a love to be quiet and solitude in the creative, in the creation. We spent hours on boats in bays and crossing oceans, and that I've come to believe in these later years that this spirit of solitude and quietness in nature is deeply therapeutic. And in this crazy digital space that is so noisy, it's essential for our hearts and minds to be quiet in nature. And Dad naturally took us there, and we experienced that. I love the fact that he loved being rational and logical. His expertise with numbers and figures has worked through so many areas of his life, and I thank him for that. And not that people call me rational and logical, but it's definitely a piece of my spirit and the way I approach things. He also always gave the context and the real story. You know, Mum would tell a story about what happened when we were young, and Dad would say, well, hang on. And he would recite the bigger picture and the real story and the whole context.
Some family stuff.
And my wife always complains about, I'm too long-winded, and I said, I've got to give the context. The context. What's that? But Dad always gave his pursuit of the real story, and of course that's what led to his book. And because he was so frustrated with all the tour operators and all his Sundays, he made up all his stories about place names. So he sat and documented every place name and researched the history and the facts behind every story. The argument that James referred to between he and I just used to argue with Dad on principle because I love to wind him up. We sailed my boat up to the Whitsundays, and we've been at sea for a month, and we were going to make landfall and greet Mum and Dad. And Dad said, well, while you're up here, would you mind just going out to sea to verify this photo that I had? Well, not a photo, it was a drawing by Joseph Banks of an island in the Whitsundays. And he said, now, my theory is he was at this coordinate and he was sailing in this direction. So if you could go out to sea and come down that compass bearing and take a photo of the islands as they appear before you. So I said, Dad, we just really want to get home. We've been at sea for a month. Oh, don't worry about it, it's all right. It happened to be one of the worst days on water. The sea was rolling and we beat our way out, and If I'd gone out to the coordinate Dad had given me, we would still be out there. But we eventually decided to come back in, and it was so rocky and roll, I couldn't even take a photo with the camera. But from what I saw, you know, I had forever disputed his recollection of what Banks had painted. So that was always a fun thing to stir him up about detail. I love him for his commitment to family, and you know, Mum and Dad have been married for nearly 70 years, and he was always present and always there for us. He was protective and generous. He was patient and very kind. He was a rescuer and a forgiver. He rescued me on many occasions in little boats, financially at times. I remember at the end of our school speech night, I was so full of excitement that we were off to the after speech party with a young lady beside me in the car. I backed out of our driveway into our street where there were no cars except directly behind me, and I drove straight into it. And Dad comes out and says, "Look, don't worry about it, you go." When Mum found out about that, she was furious. But Dad was the rescuer. Incredibly creative. He would make something out of nothing. And in his mind, he could picture things that should be and could be, and would build them and put them together. And I love that trait, to have that spirit released in Benny, to see obstacles and situations that need something new, see some new creation. And for me, it wasn't boats, but it's about things, particularly building people and building men and women. So I'm so thankful for that. And Dad has left this deep legacy in me personally. He stirred up God-given gifts that he didn't realise. He's imparted his own qualities and given me permission to live a really wonderful life. Dad would be a little shocked, I think, to know that one of the areas he has incredibly equipped me is in my relationship with my Heavenly Father. And this quality of solitude and silence that became the language of communication between he and I is actually the language of God. And being still before God and letting God impart his character and his strength and wisdom to us, it's in the quiet place. It's in the wilderness. It's in the adventure. And although Dad was not religious, I had this feeling he was deeply spiritual without even knowing that the qualities God had given him were passed on to us. And we're very thankful for an adventurous, wonderful, full life. Dad was a true gift from God as a friend and a father to me. But we thank you, God, that you've given him to us for all these years. It doesn't go unnoticed in my mind that this event in our life is either side of Easter, baptised on Wednesday and the funerals on Tuesday. And, you know, the most dramatic of father-son events happened at Easter, where there was the break of the relationship and the grief and the hurt and the pain. And then there was the following moments of an empowered life, a blessing and a release of miracles and power that brought blessing to many. I think that is what I experienced with Dad as I grieved his loss and departure. I thank him for the release of power and life and miracles for my family and for those around me. We'll miss you, Dad. We're going to have our closing hymn. We'll do what we did with the opening hymn. I'd like you to stand the song and the words are going to be on the screen. Again, for those of you that are familiar with the words, you're welcome to sing along. So let's all be standing and we'll close with well-known Amazing Grace.
You just stand here, we sit.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fear relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Twas grace that led me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. The Lord has promised good to me, His word my hope secures. Oh, He will my shield and portion be, as long as life endures. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Then when we first begun.
Every city we know about.
If you take the surface sheet, you will see there on the right-hand side, on the inside there is the Lord's Prayer, Matthew 6, 9 to 13. And just invite you to read it together, just as it's written there in the surface sheet. Matthew 6, 9 to 13. And Jesus said, pray like this. dwelling in heavenly realms, may the glory of your name be the centre on which our lives stand. Manifest your kingdom realm and cause your every purpose to be fulfilled on earth, just as it is in heaven. We acknowledge you as our provider of all we need each day. Forgive us the wrongs we have done, as we ourselves release forgiveness to those who have wronged us. Rescue us every time we face tribulation, and set us free from evil. For you are the King who rules with power and glory forever. Amen. Just invite you to bow with me, and we'll just have a final benediction as we close our time together. Father in heaven, we thank you for being with us this afternoon. Father, you know that the heaviness of our hearts, you know the grief as we mourn the passing of this one whom we love. Father, we thank you for Ray, we thank you for his life. We thank you for the precious memories, some of which have been shared, many others which we cherish in our hearts. And Father, we thank you for his legacy, the legacy that lives on in his children and his grandchildren, and surely in many other lives that he has touched also. Thank you for the privilege that we've had of being able to share in his journey. Father, we ask that as our service draws to a close now, that you would be close to each of us that mourn today. Embrace us with your love and your comfort today and in the days ahead. And I ask this please in the name of Jesus, our hope and assurance. Amen. Thank you all again for being here, and thank you to all those that shared. It's not easy to get up and share, but it's been a blessing to be able to hear what you shared with us this afternoon. I just want to remind you again of the invitation to stay for the drinks, some eats as well, at a time of catching up and fellowship. Please invite yourself.